central control. Fashion designer Katharine Hamnett thinks the disaster shows us that the nuclear option is no option.
Costa do Pacífico de Hokkaido. A parte central da costa do Pacífico de Hokkaido. A parte oeste da costa.
The images coming out of Japan are heartbreaking. It's almost impossible to grasp the scale of this unimaginable disaster. Whole towns, villages, families, everything's been washed away. The stoicism of the Japanese people in the face of this horror is amazing. Our hearts go out to them. What the Japanese people have suffered already is bad enough, but now natural disaster has collided with man-made hazard. If they can't cool the reactors at Fukushima, they face full-scale nuclear meltdown. The worst may still be to come. I don't like nuclear power, but I know that at least half the country disagrees with me. But surely even the most hardened nuclear supporters, when they see images of children being checked for radiation and the tragic struggle of the engineers to get the plant under control, must pause for thought. The coalition government must reassess the risks of building a new generation of nuclear power stations. Many in the pro-nuclear lobby say we have to have nuclear because there's no alternative to meet our energy needs, but there's plenty of alternatives. We have tidal, solar, wind, and carbon capture and storage combined with clean coal and gas. I'm not a nuclear scientist, I'm a fashion designer. I don't pretend to be an expert, but as a human being and global citizen, I'm terrified for the future of this planet, for our children, in fact for all life on Earth, if we continue on this nuclear path.
Katharine in her stylish monochrome studio in North London, we'd expect nothing less, joins us now in our tastelessly colourful little Westminster studio. Welcome to this week. Let me put a general question to you. It is almost certain that over 10,000 people, maybe a lot more, have been killed by the tsunami as it flooded in and wiped out towns and villages. No one as yet has died from the nuclear problems. Why do you think we're so concerned about nuclear?
Well, it's a well-known fact that nuclear radiation causes cancer. I mean, in its more extreme forms, it causes radiation burns, radiation sickness. I mean, it may not onset immediately, but within a week's time, certainly the engineers who've been unbelievably bravely risking their lives, you know, fighting, trying to keep the plant under control, are going to start getting sick because they're receiving massive doses of radiation. It isn't something that's just like bang.
Indeed, and you're quite right. They are the most vulnerable.
For, what, half-life, 250,000 years? People go on getting sick.
But the rest of the area has been evacuated, and even if these people, these brave people who are doing it for the rest of us, if they were to lose their lives, and you're quite right, some may over time, they are still a handful compared to the thousands from the tsunami.
It's two different things, isn't it? These poor people survived, well, this nightmare of the tsunami, and then the few who've managed to escape to safety, and then they've got this raining down on their heads. But it's it could get a lot worse. We could have the whole thing go. It could be another Chernobyl. And the effect of that is, you know, half-life of 250,000 years, land permanently contaminated, cancers, bystander effect, more and more birth defects, right, you know, from humans right the way through, you know, down to microorganisms. It affects all life.
Is it inevitable, Michael, that the rebirth of nuclear power, on which we were on the brink of that, started under the Labour government, continued by the coalition government, happening in other countries too. Is there going to be second thoughts?
It depends who you mean is going to do the second thinking.
Well, is it going to make us think, as Katharine would certainly like us to say, are we really right to go down this road?
I'm sure it will reignite a campaign against nuclear power, but I don't think it will lead the government probably to change its mind. I mean, the position in the United Kingdom is that the nuclear power stations that we have at the moment are beginning to close down, and the electricity that they produce needs to be replaced by something, and that environmentalists have succeeded in convincing the government that it shouldn't be building new stations that burn gas or coal or oil, and therefore nuclear power is the only possibility, because although wind and wave and tide are all very desirable and can play a part, they can only play a small part. And in the case of wind, for example, you can only rely on them when the wind is blowing, so we've got to build other plant anyway that's there to take over when the wind isn't blowing.
But you think, Katharine, that the events in Japan should really make us draw a halt to the plans to build more nuclear power stations?
Yeah, I do, because also I think that Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth are being too iffy about clean coal gas with carbon capture and storage, because carbon capture and storage is a mature technology. It just needs the business model now put into place, and if you combine that with biomass, for instance, you could actually get to the point when you could get a carbon negative energy supply, and it can also deliver base load, which is what nuclear is supposed to be able to do, and it's adjustable. So if we have our wind, you know, if there's a drop in the wind, you can easily turn it up. You can even burn residual waste.
I'm perfectly prepared to believe that nuclear power might be something that we would only use for, I don't know, a century. But I can't see how in the next few decades we're going to get by without nuclear power.
Jacqui, the Labour Party,
it's too dangerous.
Nuclear power used to divide the Labour Party, but the last Labour government began the process of what I've called the rebirth of nuclear energy in this country. You've set the pace. The coalition government is proceeding with the policy you've laid down. Will events in Japan and the views expressed by people like Katharine, will the Labour Party have a rethink on this?
I don't think so, for the reasons that Michael suggested. And incidentally, Katharine, of course, it was Ed Miliband who put in place the process for carbon capture and storage, which will enable clean coal technology to play a part in that balanced energy.
But that technology is a long way to go.
Well, okay, but the progress has started. And I think the key point here is I think everybody recognises the need for a range of energy sources, both including nuclear, both for energy security and, of course, because of the contribution that other energy sources can play to reducing carbon levels. What I do think people will rethink are issues around safety. I mean, I agree with Katharine that I think it is inevitable that people, you know, and I'm very pragmatic about nuclear, but I've thought more carefully over the last week or so about some of the issues to do with safety. And this is a real test for the industry, because the industry has to be completely honest with people about what is happening in Japan, what potentially could happen.
Japanese people are not sure the industry's been honest with them.
Well, exactly, and that's why, and in my view...
Over Sellafield, we were never sure if
exactly.
the British were honest with us.
This is a good example of an issue like GMO foods.
Why do you think
like
they'll be honest
MMR.
with us in the future?
Well, the point I'm not necessarily saying they will, Andrew, but the point I'm making is that this is a real test for the industry to properly spell out the risks and to be honest with us. And I think if they're not, actually, there is a problem for development.
It can't exist without public subsidy, so you can't say that it's cheap. And while there's the 2003 energy review said can't exist without public subsidy, and while there's no long-term safe disposal system for nuclear waste, it has to stay on the back burner.
Let me ask you this. I mean, wind power or wave power couldn't exist without public subsidy either. Most forms of energy seem to need some kind of public subsidy. Let me ask you this. You have in front of you, in a sense, the Westminster Consensus, and even some of the Lib Dems take the line that Jacqui and Michael are taking tonight. The public opinion may be different from the Westminster Consensus. What do you say to them to make them rethink?
I'd say let's have a referendum on it.
Why not?
Because we have a representative democracy and we elect politicians to take really difficult decisions like this.
So why are we having a referendum on something that's many people think infinitely less important, like the alternative vote?
Well, we're having a referendum on that because there had to be a deal to put a coalition together. That's a
this issue about public opinion, actually, of course, is part of the problem. When I fought the general election last year, there was a very strong campaign in my constituency against a wind farm, which actually I supported. and it's pretty difficult to develop some of those renewable forms of energy, onshore wind in particular, precisely because of the opposition that comes, sometimes rightly, from local communities.
But you talked earlier of the need for the industry to come clean and be honest with us. Could you be honest with us? You're a former Home Secretary. If we had a major nuclear crisis in this country, could we be confident that the Japanese have been criticised for how they're dealing with it. Would we deal with it any better? After we listened to the 7/7 inquest, it doesn't give you great confidence. We all thought, as a sophisticated nation, knowing we would be under terrorist attack, we would deal well with it. We didn't.
Well, one of the inevitabilities of dealing with those sorts of civil contingencies is that you can never completely avoid accidents, but what you can do is to ensure that you've got the best possible analysis of where the risks are likely to be. And of course, one of the things that we did through a committee that I actually led was for the first time to publish a more public national risk register that spelt out the likelihood of a risk happening and the seriousness of the impact of it. And then you actually need to engage all of those emergency services that you would need to deal with those particular issues. And I think actually in this country we're pretty sophisticated in doing that.
Well,
so have we ringed Sellafield with anti-aircraft?
That of course is not to say that there can never be
Le Havre after 9/11.
That there can never be an accident, and one of the reasons for the intelligence gathering that we do is precisely to try to identify where those risks
Katharine,
are.
I'll give you the final word and put this to you in the global context this takes place. There's a great desire for energy security. There's even more desire, given the events in North Africa and in the Middle East, not to be dependent on these countries for more oil and gas. And that's the argument that nuclear power is meant to answer. That's what you will have to confront.
We have renewables here. We have the best renewables in Europe. Unfortunately, we haven't exploited them to the level that the Germans have. If we introduce feed-in tariff, for instance, a good feed-in tariff which would encourage domestic electricity generation, that would fill some of the slots. After all, we only get, I think, 18.6% of our electricity from nuclear. I think 3.7% of UK energy. Nuclear is inherently dangerous. It's liable to terrorist attack. The world has never been a more dangerous place. We've just seen what's happened in Japan. This could happen here. If we had a terrorist attack on Sellafield, it would be 10 times the size. The damage would be 10 times the size of Chernobyl. You'd wipe out the north of England.
Okay,
so we have to rethink.
Thank you very much. Now,